Week 2 of the VCT America's regular season stage is just around the corner, and it's time to talk about which teams could potentially be dark horses for the race to qualify for Shanghai. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we're talking about 4 different teams in the VCT Americas League that could potentially put themselves in conversations to be very good throughout the year. So this is the board I've put together. We have G2, MIBR, 100 Thieves, and Cloud9. I kind of thought about putting Crew on this list as well, but I want to see a bit more from Crew before I think of them as doing much of anything, because so far they've only beaten Furia, and Furia is not exactly the hardest to beat. I think they're the worst team in the league, so I want to see more from them before I think of them as a potential dark horse. And if you don't know what a dark horse is, a dark horse team is essentially a team that doesn't have super high expectations, but you could maybe see them going on a run and doing a lot of damage. So these 4 teams are the teams that right now I think maybe have the best chance at doing that, but maybe some have more chances than others. So starting off with G2, a team that has been kind of up and down in 2024 so far. They did have kind of a rough kickoff. They were able to beat Crew twice, but then in the playing stage they did fall short against both Sentinels and MIBR. While they did technically beat Sentinels, they did lose the first map to them, which means Sentinels were able to just throw the other 2 maps and not really care about the rest of the match, so you don't really count it as a win. But this is a team that did come from the Tier 2 system, so there is a learning curve to the start of the year. While the skill gap between Tier 1 and Tier 2 might not be as huge in Valorant as other esports, it still is an adjustment period, and G2 so far, at least in their first match against Evil Geniuses, which is a rematch from kickoff, they were able to bring it to them and look much better than they did during that first tournament. They were able to beat them 2-0, kind of stomping EG on that second map, and definitely cementing themselves as the better team right now. We'll see if these teams face again in the future, but so far they are 1-1 against each other, so G2 right now looks like the better team. For their MVP, I chose Valen. He is, of course, the IGL on the team. He was their best player in that Evil Geniuses match, and I think Valen is a pretty underrated IGL. If this team ends up going on a pretty long run, we might eventually see Valen in conversations for top 3, top 5 IGLs in Americas at least. And Valen, in my opinion, is the main reason why the guard roster has been able to be successful up until this point, especially due to all the roster changes that this roster has gone through throughout their time together. So far, they're perfect on split. They have a 3-0 record. Now, granted, one of those is against Sentinels in that Mickey Mouse map, so it's basically 2-0, but even so, they do look pretty good on that map. Their next match is against 100 Thieves, who are also on the board, a team that will be looking to have a much better year than they did last year. So the match is going to be 2 teams that have a lot to prove, but I'll get to 100 Thieves later. So one notable thing about this team is that Leaf has been moved onto the Killjoy role as they bring in Icy, who is now their duelist, and he is still adjusting. Icy didn't have a great match against Evil Geniuses, but it is his first match with this team, so there is still time for him to get accustomed to the way they play and all that. So if he can be that effective duelist player, then Leaf won't need to go back to that role. He did look good on the Killjoy. We'll see if that ends up sticking, but Leaf has been known to switch his roles from time to time. So Leaf is a pretty versatile player. And if his recent play is anything to go off of, he should be pretty good on that Killjoy Sentinel role. I do like G2's chances as a dark horse. I did have them at number 5 when I did my preseason power rankings. They did drop after kickoff, but they have moved up a little bit. So I do have faith in this team. I don't know if they're going to make an international event this year, but just like they've been able to improve and adapt in the past, I think that they continue to do it, and I think they're going to be a good team throughout the year. So moving on to a team that I probably wouldn't have had in this category before the season started, but after their performance at kickoff, I do actually kind of like MIBR's chances this year. I don't think they're going to be an insanely good team or anything, but this team did surprise me and a lot of people at kickoff. Granted, their bracket at kickoff wasn't super hard. They did play against Cloud9, a team that has since gone through roster changes, but then they beat Furia, and then they beat Cloud9 in the rematch to make it 2 play-in, and then they actually ended up beating G2 in that playing stage. They did lose to Sentinels, of course, 2-0, but they were able to stomp out any hope of G2 making that last match of the day competitive. And honestly, I was really impressed, and I did end up putting this team at, I believe, number 5 when I did my power rankings after kickoff, and a lot of people said that that was too high, and my argument was that yeah, maybe they're not better than a 100 Thieves or any other team that I had below them, such as G2. They were able to go on a run and they were playing some pretty good Valorant during that kickoff tournament. So that is something that I kind of look at when I do my power rankings, not necessarily who I think is the best when you just look at it overall, but it's about who is playing well at the time of that power rankings, and MIBR were doing very well. For their MVP right now, I chose RGL Meister. We'll see if that ends up staying the case. He did have pretty similar stats to some other teammates like JZZ and FRZ, so we'll see if that ends up being the case. But something that strikes me about MIBR is that they're not necessarily a team that's full of talent, but they are a team that seems very structured and very well coached. They do have two former coaches that were on Loud. They had the coach from last year in Fraud, and then the year before that, Bazooka. So while these coaches don't have an ass pass or a less to work with, they do have some pretty solid players who, as long as you give them the right systems and the right strategies to succeed, they can potentially do it. Think about 100 Thieves in 2022. After that team got Sean Garris as their coach, they looked a lot better, even though the talent on that team maybe wasn't as good as the results. Sean Garris is a very smart mind in Valorant. He's been playing esports for a long time, and when he left that coaching job, 100 Thieves just haven't looked the same since. Valuing coaches in Valorant is kind of hard, but you can see when a really good coach comes in and turns around a team, and potentially that could happen with MIBR, with Fraud, and Bazooka. So far on Breeze, they have a 2-0 record, looking like their best map so far. Granted, small sample size, but still, perfect record. And their next match is against Crew, and that's not going to be an easy out. Crew do look a lot better than they did at kickoff. They have Heat now, who has been looking pretty good, at least in that first match against Furia. And that's a team looking to prove themselves as well. So if MIBR wants to stay in this conversation for Dark Horse, they're going to have to beat teams that are trying to get into that conversation as well. And Crew is one of those teams. So if they're truly going to go on a run, they have to show pretty good results against at least Crew, because if you don't beat Crew, I don't know how well you're going to do against some of the other better teams in that group. But it is a relatively easy match to start off with, so we'll see how both of those teams do. Overall, MIBR, I don't think they're going to make any internationals this year, but I do think that they're potentially going to be playing spoiler to teams that are seen as better than them throughout the year. And maybe that's something that they build on and continue to build throughout next year, and maybe this team can, prove that Brazil is not a one-team country. Moving on to 100 Thieves, which is a team that is still kind of hard to call in this Dark Horse race. This team was probably the favorite team to call a Dark Horse team before the season started. A lot of, even the players in a preseason podcast admitting that they're probably the Dark Horse. And we haven't seen that just yet, but we do see some flashes of this new iteration of 100 Thieves potentially doing something this year. So far, they've had a pretty tough schedule. They were in the group of death. They did face Leviathan at kickoff and then Sentinels, two very not easy matches. I mean, Leviathan doesn't look very good right now, but they still have ass pass. That's a hard matchup for anybody. And Sentinels, of course, being the Madrid winners, that is no easy task. Plus, 100 Thieves just always loses to Sentinels. As I said in my video recapping last weekend, they just always lose. I'm always going to pick Sentinels over 100 Thieves, so I don't put too much stock into that loss because it's just historically a bad matchup for 100 Thieves. So we haven't seen this team face another team that is seen in kind of the mid-range of the Americas, so whenever that does happen, their next match is against G2, so that's going to be a very competitive match. Whichever team comes out on top, I think, is going to be able to show that they're going to have a good season, or show that it might just be too tough for whichever one of these teams to really get going. So that is a very, very important match, but G2 already has one win under their belt against Evil Geniuses, and 100 Thieves have started off with a loss. So, each loss, it gets that much tougher to make playoffs, so you really got to win that one if you're 100 Thieves. For the MVP, I chose CryoCells. I know Cryo gets a lot of hate online. Some of it is warranted, being critical of this player who came in after they dropped Will to let this guy come in from Xset. Expectations were high, and I don't think that Cryo has lived up to them yet, but so far in 2024, he's been their most consistent player. Bucio's had his flashes, Asanaz looked really rough so far. CryoCells, maybe him on Astra isn't exactly the best idea. We'll see if that ends up improving for him. But when he's on Jet, he seems pretty comfortable. Maybe we see him on Chamber at some point this year. He was really good on Chamber when he was on Xset. So we'll see how Cryocells progresses throughout this year, but if this team's going to do anything, you really need to get him going. So far on Bind, they are 1-1, so they don't have a positive record on a map yet, but that of course makes sense. They've only played 3 matches and they lost all of them. So for 100 Thieves, their next 3 matches are winnable matches. They are playing G2, as I said. After that is Cloud9, and after that is Crew. They end the season with Energy. So if they can win their next 3, they are comfortably in playoffs. If you can make that match against Energy as low stakes as you possibly can, then you're in a good spot. But if you lose one of the next 3, then you put yourself in a position where your last match, your most important match of the season, is against one of the best teams in the region. So that's very important for 100 Thieves to get it going now so that they don't have to make up for that losses later. I do have some faith in this 100 Thieves team. We just haven't seen enough yet, but I still think that they are potentially dark horses. But maybe that time in the group of death and then playing Sentinels, maybe that is teaching this team early that this is not going to be an easy road. So maybe that experience can help them in the future, and that's definitely what you're hoping for if you're a 100 Thieves fan. Moving on to our last team, we have Cloud9. I really don't know what this Cloud9 team is going to be. They of course bring in Moose and then bring Rooney back. Rooney had a really good first match back against Leviathan. That was a really good win for the whole team. They were able to push back against Leviathan, who were controlling the play for that first map and then the first part of the second map. And then Cloud9, while the play from both teams was just extremely sloppy, they were able to push back, bring that last map into overtime, and win the game. So that's a good sign for this team. They've shown resilience. They've shown that they can go the distance against a team that is seen as better than them. I don't know if winning against Leviathan, a team that I think is going to struggle throughout this year, is going to be a huge accomplishment, but it is a team that is seen as better than Cloud9. So definitely a good thing to build off of for this team. For the MVP, I chose Oxy. He has looked pretty good up until this point. I thought maybe coming out of kickoff, people might have been overrating him a little bit, but he has shown flashes of greatness. He's still really young. As he gets more experience, he's going to just keep getting better and better. He is a very good pickup for Cloud9 in the offseason, so he's probably going to be the centerpiece of this roster for a long time. So far, they don't have a positive record on a map, but they do have Sunset they are 1-1 on. They did beat Leviathan 13-7 on that map, which is better than losing 7-13 against Energy, which they did earlier. For their next opponent, they are playing Evil Geniuses, a team just coming off of a loss against G2. That is a winnable game for them. I do think Evil Geniuses are going to try very hard to bounce back, especially with Potter having time to iron out the mistakes that she saw in that roster during that match against G2. So that definitely is going to be a tough match for Cloud9. I do think when you look at those rosters on paper, Cloud9 should be the better team, but we don't really know what Evil Geniuses is going to be yet. They did lose to G2, but they could also put themselves in the conversation for a dark horse, but I went with 4 teams and I thought these teams had a better chance. But there are definitely some weapons on that team, so do not take them lightly. Cloud9 had a disappointing kickoff, which I personally wasn't super surprised by when I looked at that roster in the offseason. I know they did pretty good against Fnatic at Red Bull Homeground, but it was an offseason tournament. I just didn't put a lot of stock into that. I just didn't really see that roster doing a lot of damage in the VCT Americas. But with Rooney coming back, if this iteration of Cloud9 works, then I will, of course, backtrack what I said, because this team, if they end up going on a run, then, of course, they were right and I was wrong. As we previously talked about, they did beat Leviathan 2-1. That is a very important win for this team, a great way to start off the stage. And if they can continue to build off of that, they can definitely string together some wins. After Evil Geniuses, they do have Loud. After that, 100 Thieves. After that, Furia and MIBR. So I would see 4 out of those last 5 matches as winnable. I don't know if they beat Loud, but I think they can beat EG. They maybe can beat 100 Thieves. Furia, they can beat Furia. MIBR, I mean, we'll see where both of those teams are at when that match rolls around. That will be a good match because that'll be a rematch. But there is maybe some good things to build off of here for Cloud9, so we'll see where they end up. Let me know what you guys think of all 4 of these teams on the board. What teams do you think are dark horses in the VCT Americas? Is it any of the teams on the board, or is it any teams that I left out? Let me know in the comment section down below. Please click like if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.